In this video, we will be discussing the many different SeaView data products, what they tell us about pelagic fish locations, and how to best use SeaView data in combination to locate productive fishing locations. Nowadays, there is a variety of oceanographic and weather products available to help fishers find fish faster. As a SeaView subscriber, your fishing strategy should involve much more than simply relying on sea surface temperature data, commonly referred to as SST. We'll go over how you can better understand the many SeaView data products and where these data come from, and how you can use these data to locate fish more effectively. We'll start with a short introduction to remote sensing and satellite oceanography. We'll discuss in detail oceanographic convergence zones, why fish are attracted to these zones in the ocean, and how to locate them in SeaView data. How to use the different data types together to refine your search and improve your fishing strategy. This is how fishers used to use remote sensing to help locate fish schools. Today, things are quite a bit different. There is an abundance of oceanographic and weather data that we can use to help find productive fishing spots. To list a few of the SeaView products, there is sea surface temperature imagery, sea surface temperature composite imagery, microwave-derived sea surface temperature, plankton or chlorophyll imagery, both single satellite overpass and composite, subsurface temperature, sea surface height anomaly, mixed layer depth, salinity, ocean bottom topography or bathymetry, and a variety of data and weather products. The question you may be asking is, how do I use all of this information to find the fish and catch more of them? Let's start with a quick lesson on what we call oceanographic remote sensing. Remote sensing is simply defined as the scanning of the Earth by satellite or high-flying aircraft in order to obtain information about it. In the case of SeaView data, we are using satellite data that focus on the ocean conditions, as well as oceanographic models that generate maps of certain oceanographic parameters, such as salinity. The potential for monitoring Earth from space was recognized as early as the 1960s. Accurate measuring of ocean using infrared radiometers started in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The United States NASA JPL was the first to distribute the sea surface temperature and chlorophyll data to fishermen. In 1984, ocean imaging took the job after NASA funding ran out, and we've been helping fishermen ever since. Ocean imaging and the SeaView team get the data used to produce the SeaView data products from many different sources. Directly from satellites with very specialized sensors on board, from universities and government agencies who pre-process the satellite data and then pass the raw data to us to further process and turn the data into usable SeaView information, and from oceanographic models such as the U.S. Navy's Hybrid Coordinate Oceanographic Model, otherwise known as HICOM. Here is a list of just a few of the sensors and data sources used to create the different SeaView data products. Most satellites are polar orbiting or sun-synchronous, circling the Earth every 99 to 112 minutes, meaning we get 1 to 4 overpasses per day per satellite. Some satellites, such as the satellite altimeter's SSH data, only revisit a spot on the Earth every 3 to 10 days. Computer models producing data sets such as mixed layer depth, salinity, and subsurface temperature input satellite data and historical climatological data to output synthetic images. Ocean imaging acquires the raw satellite and computer model data from all these government, private, and university sources, and then further processes the satellite data to calibrate, georeference, correct for atmospheric contamination, and convert to use in the SeaView format. The SeaView data are then sent to our SeaView data servers, ready for download to your vessel, home, or office via an internet connection. The internet link can be a high-speed broadband connection via satellite telephone installed on your boat. So, now we have all of these different SeaView oceanographic and weather data products which you can download and display in the SeaView application. How do we use this variety of information to locate productive fishing grounds? This will, of course, depend on the fish species you are targeting as well as the region in which you are fishing, but a few basic concepts can be used no matter where you are fishing. The primary strategies to locate productive fishing areas are: use the different SeaView data products such as sea surface temperature, chlorophyll, sea surface height anomaly, and ocean currents to locate deep, persistent, and stable oceanographic convergence zones. Convergence zones can also be called ocean frontal zones. Use the SeaView chlorophyll plankton data to locate zones of high biologic productivity where bait fish may be concentrating. Use the many different sea surface temperature products to find areas of the preferred temperature for your target species. Locate ocean convergence and shear zones, which will help you find larger oceanographic convergence zones. Use the mixed layer depth data to find areas where bait fish might be higher or lower in the water column and possibly better depths to set your gear. Use the salinity data when the skies are cloudy as another data set to help you find oceanographic convergence zones. Use the SeaView weather data products to help plan your fishing trip and see if weather and atmospheric conditions may have impacted the oceanographic stability of your region. We will discuss these types of data and concepts in the upcoming slides. So what SeaView data products do we start with? Let's start with the basics. Most of the fish species targeted by SeaView users live either on the continental shelves or in shallower water or in deep ocean waters. The one thing that these fish have in common is that when in the fishing grounds, they are searching for food. These top-level predators are mostly visual feeders. They prefer to be near food-rich areas, but also need to see their prey in relatively clear water. The food chain that they exploit will depend on which oceanographic regime the species are living in, on the shallower continental shelf region out in the open ocean or in the coastal upwelling zones usually just outside of the continental shelf region. It is important to understand your target species' food source and just how these bait fish and other types of forage concentrate in the different oceanographic regimes. The SeaView plankton or chlorophyll data along with the sea surface temperature imagery can help locate these areas of feed concentration. The species you are after are usually in feeding mode when you are trying to catch them, so finding where their prey concentrates is important. So is the ocean temperature. Many of the larger fish species, such as tuna and swordfish, have preferred temperature ranges that they spend most of their time in. So finding just the right temperature range near an area of high biological productivity is a good start. But finding a certain sea surface temperature is just part of the equation, especially since different fish species react differently to sea surface temperature in different parts of the world. The important knowledge to include in your fishing strategy is to know what the preferred temperature range is for your target species in your specific part of the world, and even what temperature the fish prefer during a certain time of year, and in what temperature they are being caught most often during that particular season. This is where oceanographic convergence zones enter the fishing equation. Convergence zones are deep walls of water that separate ocean waters of different type. Different type can mean that on one side of the water is warmer, lower in nutrients, clearer or less phytoplankton, and perhaps higher salinity or dissolved oxygen levels. On the other side of the convergence zone, or underwater wall, the water might be cooler, have a higher chlorophyll level, and be much more green in color or turbid. Fish will congregate along these convergent zones, or walls, in the best of both worlds. On one side of the convergent zone, the water might be right with nutrients and bait, but on the other side, the water may be clearer and be a preferred temperature of the target fish species, usually warmer. Coastal and offshore upwelling will often create these areas of contrast, the convergence zone. Here is an example of the path of a striped marlin tagged with an acoustic tracking device over a 24-hour time period off the coast of California. Note the track of the marlin followed the frontal zone with the warmer blue water on the northeast side of the break, a convergence zone, and the cooler, greener, more nutrient-rich waters on the southwest side. The marlin traveled approximately 53.5 nautical miles in 24 hours. This figure illustrates both the tendency of this pelagic species to follow oceanographic convergence zone, but also the distance of a fish of this sort can travel in one day. Oceanographic convergence zones can often be seen in the sea surface temperature imagery. That is why sea surface temperature imagery is one of the most commonly used sources of ocean data when it comes to finding fish. Convergence zones, as seen in the sea surface temperature imagery, are seen when there are sharp sea surface temperature gradients, meaning the ocean temperature changes rapidly over a short horizontal distance. Sea surface temperature gradients are also called breaks or edges. Start by looking at the SeaView sea surface temperature imagery and locating relatively strong sea surface temperature frontal zones or edges. The relative strength of a sea surface temperature edge will depend on where you are fishing. Tropical regions will show much weaker sea surface temperature gradients or edges than coastal waters, which experience strong coastal upwelling. Figure out what qualifies as a strong, stable sea surface temperature gradient for your fishing region. Sea surface temperature edges are not the entirety of our fishing strategy, however. We want to look at other factors, such as where the currents are moving in the water. Are the currents creating a convergence zone? How long has a sea surface temperature edge been in the same general location? Has the convergence zone, as shown by the sea surface temperature edge, been around long enough to attract and concentrate the bait fish? Are the currents pushing the greener, more nutrient-rich and bait-rich waters into the blue, clear, warm water? Some of the other SeaView products will help us answer some of these questions. So how do we find a stable convergence zone that has bait that will attract our target species? First, look for sea surface temperature edges in the SeaView imagery. If you are in a more tropical region, perhaps a strong gradient is only a few tenths of a degree. Look on the warmer side of the sea surface temperature edge, where the temperature is in that range presently preferred by your target fish species. Sometimes your target species may prefer the cooler side of the break, and in some regions, your target species may prefer to be in slightly warmer water or just a short distance away from the actual sea surface temperature edge. Concentrate on stable convergence zones, not just the surface phenomena that will dissipate in a day or so. Look at the plankton imagery and the sea surface height data and try to determine if your selected sea surface temperature edge is a deep frontal zone which will stay in place for at least a few days. Look for pockets of clearer or bluer water surrounded by water of a different type, especially if plankton-rich and perhaps bait-rich waters are nearby. Look for sea surface temperature edges that correlate in space and time with convergence zone indicators seen in other SeaView data types. Now, let's discuss some of those other data types. Sea surface height anomaly is another good data type to use to locate oceanographic convergence zones, especially when conditions have been persistently cloudy and obscuring the view of the sea surface temperature and chlorophyll satellites. Sea surface height data are derived from satellite altimeters which measure the height of the ocean compared to the Earth's geoid, or the shape that the ocean surface would take under the influence of gravity and rotation of Earth alone, if other influences, such as winds and tides, were absent. Sea surface height anomaly represents the present sea surface height measurements relative to a long-term average. You can think of sea surface height anomalies kind of like natural hills and valleys that occur on a large scale across the ocean. The water flows downhill from high anomalies and uphill from the low anomalies, creating ocean convergence zones. Fish are found more often than not in the areas on the outskirts of the low or high anomalies and not near the center of these features. Correlating the outer edges of a high and low anomaly location with the locations of sea surface temperature edges and possibly converging currents can help locate stable convergence zones and better fishing spots. Sea surface height contour lines can be overlaid on the sea surface temperature imagery in SeaView. It is important to have a good understanding of the seasonal, local currents in your fishing region, as well as the larger ocean-wide currents that affect your area. download the geostrophic currents. Those are derived strictly from the sea surface height anomaly data, as well as the model-derived currents, such as the HICOM currents, and overlay on top of different data types such as sea surface temperature, sea surface height anomaly, and plankton imagery. Compare the ocean arrows to these other data types and look where converging currents match, where other types of data show possible convergence or frontal zones. Here you see geostrophic currents overlaid with sea surface temperature, sea surface height contour data, and then HICOM model currents overlaid on HICOM sea surface height data. The next data type to include in your fishing strategy is the ocean chlorophyll level data. These images show the level of chlorophyll, which is the green pigment in ocean phytoplankton or plant plankton. That is why in SeaView we simply call these data plankton. You can use the names chlorophyll imagery and plankton imagery interchangeably in the case of SeaView. The chlorophyll or plankton data show us how much phytoplankton is growing in the water. Phytoplankton are the base of the ocean food chain. When nutrients meet the surface of the ocean and are exposed to sunlight, this often causes a phytoplankton bloom. This is also referred to as primary productivity. The zooplankton, or animal plankton, will then start to eat the phytoplankton. This can happen over a period of days to weeks. Then the planktivorous fish and other animals will show up and start feeding on the zooplankton. This is where the baitfish schools will start to concentrate and attract larger predators such as tuna, swordfish, marlin. On the clear side of the phytoplankton blooms, remember the best of both worlds theory. This is where we would be able to look for predatory species, especially if on or near areas of oceanographic convergence. In the open ocean, plankton and chlorophyll may be less important than in other regions, but don't overlook it. Chlorophyll levels will be low, but small differences can make a huge difference, especially when they coincide with other frontal zone indicators such as sea surface temperature patterns. During seasonal increases in ocean chlorophyll and phytoplankton levels, chlorophyll will become much more important and possibly a key parameter to help target productivity and convergence zones. So, how do we use these different data types together to find areas of oceanographic convergence and biological productivity? There are many ways to do this using the SeaView software. One example is to display the different images such as SST, plankton, side by side and look for areas in the imagery where you have an SST gradient that is also near a plankton edge. In most, but not all regions, tuna will most often be found on the warmer side of an SST edge in the 80 to 83 degree Fahrenheit water near a plankton edge on the blue side of the color gradient. Look for areas at which there is an SST gradient and chlorophyll in the same general direction. This will indicate a deeper oceanographic convergence zone. You can also display the SST data as contour lines over the plankton imagery, or display the plankton data as contour lines over the SST imagery to see the different types of data simultaneously. So, now we have shown you the more commonly used data types for locating productive fishing grounds: sea surface temperature, plankton, and sea surface height anomaly. Let's look at a few other sources of oceanographic data to include in your SeaView strategy: mixed layer depth, subsurface temperature, salinity, and ocean bottom topography, also known as bathymetry. Mixed layer depth can also help us locate stable oceanographic convergence zones where pelagic fish congregate. The oceanic mixed layer is a layer in which active turbulence has homogenized some ranges of depths. The surface mixed layer is a layer where turbulence is generated by winds, cooling, or processes such as the evaporation or sea ice formation, which result in an increase in salinity. Above the bottom of the mixed layer, there's often both vertical and horizontal mixing in the ocean waters. Below the mixed layer, there is usually very little vertical movement of water. The mixed layer depth is often associated with a thermocline depth as well as a halocline, which is a sharp change in salinity, and pycnocline. The plankton layer often moves up and down with the mixed layer. Used mixed layer depth to help locate convergence zones by finding where the thermocline or mixed layer depth rises or deepens dramatically over a relatively short horizontal distance. Salinity data can be another source to help you locate productive fishing zones. You can use the salinity imagery in a few ways. Salinity can act as a proxy for SST when trying to use gradients in the analysis to locate oceanographic convergence zones, or fronts. This is because salinity often has a close relationship to ocean temperature. Therefore, during excessively cloudy time periods, use salinity in place of sea surface temperature. You may even find a relationship between the level of ocean salinity and tuna behavior and location. This is a relatively new product, and so some further study must be done, but many fishermen are starting to see a correlation between salinity and their catch in their fishing area. You should plot some of your own catch results on the salinity image from the same day and see if you find a relationship. Subsurface temperature data, SBST, are commonly used by tuna longline fishermen. Subsurface temperature analysis can help determine if a sea surface temperature gradient observed in the SST imagery is representative of a deep ocean frontal zone as opposed to a transient surface temperature feature. If a temperature gradient is observed at a depth of, say, 100 to 150 meters in the same general area as a sea surface temperature feature, then there is a good chance that the SST feature is an indicator of a deep frontal zone and not just a surface gradient which will go away in a few hours to a few days. 2. Subsurface temperature data can also be used as a gauge to how deep to set your gear. Looking at the temperatures of different depths can provide information on whether or not warmer water is moving over the top of cooler water or the other way around. Ocean bathymetry, or the topography of the ocean bottom, is a very important piece of information. In SeaView, the bathymetry can be overlaid onto any image, such as sea surface temperature, sea surface height anomaly, or plankton, as ocean bottom topography contour lines. Use the bathymetry contour lines to match oceanographic features such as sea surface temperature gradient with ocean bottom features. When an ocean frontal zone indicated in the oceanographic imagery such as sea surface temperature or sea surface height is in the same location as an ocean bottom feature or sharp bathymetric drop-off, this could be another area where you will find productive fishing. With SeaView's display and overlay capabilities, you can visualize the different data types we've discussed in combination to make the best decision possible when forming your fishing strategy. You can display different images side by side and overlay different data types on top of each other as contour lines. The example shown here depicts how sea surface height contour lines and geostrophic currents can be overlaid on an SST image with ocean bathymetry shown for the cursor location on the SeaView information panel to the right. See where the different frontal zone or oceanographic convergence zone indicators match up, and these will be more productive fishing spots. In future videos, we will show you how to use the SeaView cursor linking tool and the data merge function to further enhance your data and analysis skills. In conclusion, here are a few simple tips to help you develop a strategy for the use of SeaView data at the geographical scale of the present fisheries. Use single satellite overpass SST and plankton chlorophyll data whenever possible. When those data sets are cloudy, use 1-day and 3-day SST composite images in combination with other data types. Investigate effectiveness of other data types besides SST in determining productive fishing spots. Figure out which types of ocean currents are most accurate for your region and use those data most often. Using the combination of the most recent and best available SST image, the most recent and best available plankton and chlorophyll, and the HICOM currents will be a great start. After that, start to include the CCAR SSH data and subsurface temperature imagery into the decision mix. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more instructional videos.